What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. This is going to be a long one, so buckle up. And we're hitting these topics that have been at the forefront of my mind for the last few weeks. And we're going to hit these topics from a number of different people, some people that we've covered before, some people that are new to this discussion, namely Elizabeth April and as well the Gnostics, because somebody left the comment actually in one of my recent videos saying that the Gnostics actually talked about the soul trap and well, obviously the soul trap, but also Loosh as well, which actually that part I was unaware of. And again, these aren't direct quotes from the Apocryphon of John, but this is from a Gnostic-based YouTube channel that quotes from the Apocryphon of John or references it, I should say. And so we're going to be sharing clips from that. But that's pretty interesting that they were talking about this system, whatever it was, 2000 or roughly 2000 years ago during the time of the Gnostics, which is pretty crazy. So we're going to go through everything and compare and contrast. But I mentioned this before. One of the difficulties with this journey and the frustrating part for me as the outside trying to be the objective observer is just the lack of consensus is very difficult. And maybe that's by how it's by design that things are meant to be confusing and there's meant to be disagreements amongst people searching for truth, because that makes it harder for us to discern what's really going on. Is that by design? Is that because some people are intentionally manipulated and some people aren't? And so, yeah, it's really frustrating. And let me know if you guys agree with me, if you feel that same frustration, but not going to dissuade me. I'm still going to keep questing. We're still going to keep learning and trying to make sense of all these different narratives. And I do believe all these people that I'm listening to, that I'm stumbling across, this includes Elizabeth April, Brett Stewart, David Icke, and many more. I do believe that they're trying to be guides for the truth. And so it's not that I think any of these folks are trying to push a particular narrative and for some ulterior motive, and that's why there's differences or that's why they have disagreements. I actually don't think that. I think they're all trying to push for the truth. I think they're all seeing truly and reporting back what they're seeing. But the question is then, why are there differences, especially with remote viewers or people having OBEs or astral projections? Like, that's a question that I still can't answer, but it sucks because you just want it to be, if you're coming back wanting to share the truth and really seeing things for what they are via remote viewing, then it should all match up. And for whatever reason, it doesn't always all match up. And it's just hard to get my head around it because, like I said, I truly think that these guys are legitimate, that they're trying their hardest, and something is getting in the way. I mean, it has to be, because how do you reconcile everything otherwise? Obviously, aside from the conclusion that they're just all full of it, which I do not believe. So anyways, we shall get into this video. I have assembled a ton of clips from all these different folks, and we're going to talk about them, and we're going to go back and forth. And this is going to be very, very interesting. So let's start off with Elizabeth April. This is the person that I have discovered most recently, and she's a remote viewer. If you don't know about her, she is awesome. I feel like she's very passionate about what she's trying to do in terms of trying to wake people up as a light worker. And the one thing I was wondering is she's done these great video interviews where she takes all the knowledge she's learned from remote viewing and just shares all these wild, interesting facts about this world and this plane and different people and different entities and what all the things that she's experienced about, like truths of what's really going on. And a lot of it matches up and coincides with a lot of things that I've heard other people say. So it gives me a big vote of confidence for her. But one of the things that I hadn't heard her talk about was the idea of the soul trap, was the idea of Loosh. And I was like, man, but then I hear all these other people that I feel I'm starting to really believe in terms of what they're reporting. And then she's not saying that. How can there be such a difference of opinion? So I was trying to search to see if there's anywhere I could find where she addressed this topic. I found something. So we're going to go through how she characterizes this idea of a soul trap. It is different from how it's described by other remote viewers or by David Icke or other folks. But we're going to hear her out, and then we're going to move on to some other accounts. But here she goes. Is the soul trap real? First and foremost.
And what I really want to talk about today is something called like the soul trap. or the karmic loop. So a lot of other sort of remote viewers or channelers or psychics have called it sort of the prison planet, right? Like planet Earth is a prison planet. I don't believe that that is the case. However, there is something to be said about why souls get stuck here, why souls get trapped here. And not only the implication of souls getting stuck and trapped on planet Earth, why it happens, how it happens, but then the implications of what do those souls do now, now that you're stuck here?
Okay. So now we're gonna get into more of and again, so right, it's not exactly she's not exactly framing it the way that we've heard with the big grid and the magnetic wiping of memory and the harvesting of energy. She doesn't have that same exact vantage point, that same exact perspective. But let's get into what exactly is her perspective of the quote unquote trap, as she describes it.
To a certain extent, planet Earth is a bit of a trap, and it's a bit of a, I don't want to say a prison. It's a bit of a trap, okay? But the laws of free will and the laws of non-intervention still exist here. So how are they being the Illuminati, the shadow government, the one world order, or the reptilians, whatever you want to call them? I think they're just all a bunch of reptilians. I know it's crazy, lizard people, but hear me out here. Okay. So they understand the law of non-intervention and they understand the law of free will. And they essentially have created a loophole to keep us stuck on planet Earth so that it's not necessarily an external system that keeps us trapped here. It is more of a karmic loop system. It's almost like they manipulate karma to keep our souls stuck reincarnating here. Okay? And this is how. I'm about to tell you how. Like I said, take it or leave it. I'm not here to convince you. This is just my findings. Okay? And for me, it was like the missing piece. It was like the full picture. Okay, how do I put this? Through certain ritual abuse, they damage the soul. So the way that I've heard it or observed it, it's called like breaking the soul. You can't ever break a soul. You can't ever sell a soul. As I've said before, you can sell your body for fame and riches and whatever, and then all of a sudden they sort of replace the soul in the body or what have you, right? The body snatching, possession, reptilian shape shifting, things like that. Okay. And that's like, you're doing that. You're signing a waiver, you're signing a contract, and you're saying, yes, I will take more fame and more riches or whatever it is. And you can use me however you want, but this is what I want, right? So that's how they get away with the free will and the non-intervention, is those people have to agree to it. There has to be an agreement. Okay, so that's that. But that being said, how do I put this? It's like such a big concept. For centuries, they have been doing this for generations after generations after generations. They have been doing this literally since the dawning of humanity to control us and to keep us trapped and stuck here. They target specifically the light workers, the star seeds, the old souls. So they specifically target either pure bloodlines. Okay, we're talking pure bloodlines, especially from like the Pleiades. There's certain sort of high vibrational, some of the angelic bloodlines. Nowadays, there aren't a whole lot of pure bloodlines left. So there's either sort of a purity within your genetics or there's a purity within your soul. They target the purity. The reason why they do so is because they are threatened by you and because they can actually consume more of your essence.
So right there, right, when she says this is the part where I guess she's talking about Loosh. So she's saying that they're damaging the high vibrational individuals or the light workers, and then that they're consuming the essence, which doesn't go very deep into it, like many other folks do, or exactly why they're doing this, or is that integral to the system? She just kind of mentions it here. She also says that she goes on to say that they consume us, our physical bodies as well. But that's like the closest we get to Elizabeth talking about Loosh in this video.
Okay, because that's what they do. They feed off of your energy, but they also feed off of your blood, and they also feed off of your body. Right. I know. Gross and weird, but it's true and it's happening.
And then so like the question I have here is, as she mentions that, is it a consumption that is some sort of a hedonistic consumption, like us, human beings consuming alcohol or something? Like it's something that we don't need, but people do it because they enjoy it? Is it actually, is there some external purpose to it? Is it running things? Is it actually useful for creating stuff? I still don't have that answer, and I'm wondering, there is an answer that's coming up in the Gnostic videos, but I don't know if it's the right one. And so that's still something that I'm curious about. But anyway, so that's Elizabeth talking about it. Again, still different from how other people have described it. And we're going to get into more of that as we get down to the next clips. But this is now the last clip that I have of Elizabeth April explaining, well, if it's a trap, how are we trapped here? How do we get stuck? How do we keep this is what she says.
The deeper reason behind targeting the high vibrational beings is because these beings, they know, are here to shift and change the vibration or stabilize a higher frequency. So they're also a threat. Not only can they feed off of these people, but those people, those individuals, us essentially, okay, are a threat to humanity. And so it's not just about torturing and putting you through, like, I don't even, like, it's hard for me to even talk about it because I've seen some really, really disturbing things in like remote viewing. Like we're talking like underground layers, we're talking underneath some of the royal family castles. Like this stuff has gone on and it's still going on, and it's deeply disturbing. And I'm not going to talk about details. But what happens, okay, is it's not just a one and done. It's not just a one-off torture session and then the person dies and then they get reincarnated. No, that's not the point of it. The point of it is reoccurring ritual abuse to damage the soul so deeply. Okay, this is where the reincarnation loop, the prison planet concept comes in. They damage the soul so deeply that that soul has no other choice but to come back and reincarnate on this planet so that the frequency of the trauma can only be matched here. It's kind of hard to describe, right? So like, say for example, if you stole something from someone in this lifetime, you could reincarnate on a different planet, in a different dimension, in a different place, in a different body, and have someone, an extraterrestrial, steal something from you. I know it sounds kind of petty, but I'm just giving you a simple example. What the reptilians do is they create such a brokenness in your soul that your soul is now tied to planet Earth. And what I've seen for myself in observing my own lifetimes, and then what I've seen for others as well in this predicament and situation is, it is this feeling, okay, when your soul is broken, it is the feeling like there is no more hope. Like it's total entrapment, but it feels like all your light is gone to the point where you don't have hope anymore. And I know that sounds very simple, but it's not. It is this feeling like you cannot escape your situation, that you do not have any power at all, and that you are completely hopeless. And when you remove any and all hope, any faith in the universe or yourself or the higher realms, when you're at that point, you're broken. And then you reincarnate to either re-experience that trauma, or you reincarnate with that essentially that brokenness. There's like something in you. And we can sort of equate it to like self-worth.
Yeah, so that part I'm still trying to understand exactly what you mean. She mentioned a signature, kind of a frequency that can only be matched here. So I think what she's trying to say is, because it's such a when you go through such a severe level of insane trauma, it creates some sort of signature that maybe it doesn't exist anywhere else, where you can't manifest anywhere else and match that signature. And maybe your soul's trying to match that signature because it's so deeply traumatized, and the only place it can is back here on earth. And then so you keep wanting to come back. I think maybe that's what she's saying. But again, I don't know how all of that stuff works. I haven't really heard about the trauma signature and how you want to match it, and why that you need to keep coming back to the one place where you can experience something like that. I'm just not familiar with this type of phenomenon. Is the only thing I can think of a word to say, because I just don't know. And I think that I'm quite sure that David Icke would disagree with this, because he basically dismisses this idea of karma altogether. But anyways, there's Elizabeth April's general perspective or thought on this idea of a soul trap, not this grid system and this manipulation that's happening. She does mention the free will. She does say that there's some sort of a karmic loophole that they're exploiting, some way that they're getting us to come back. So it's kind of tangentially related, but different to what I think other folks are describing in terms of the fake NDEs, if you will, conjured up to essentially manipulate people to keep reincarnating and keep making us think that we have more lessons to learn, when, as David Icke and other folks put it, it's just bollocks, and that's not actually true, and that the life review is just one giant manipulation. All right, so there's Elizabeth April. Now we're going to move on to, this is the part where she talks about the deep karmic manipulation. Sorry, I had one slide left, I forgot. So here we go, the deep karmic manipulation. Check it out.
This is the prison planet system. It is a deep karmic manipulation is what it is. Okay. And you deserve more than being stuck. And I just want to talk about being stuck for a second. So in the last 5 years, since 2020, all of these individuals who have had serious traumas in past lifetimes, purging, so much release, whether it's kidney stones or acne or psoriasis or weird skin conditions or digestive issues or hair loss or dietary issues or weight gain or whatever it is, or weird sweating matches or just constantly sick. Okay. You're going through it because you're purging out all of that shit. You are. And if we take a look at the Epstein files and what's happening, the world is purging out that shit. Okay. We need to at this time. All right. I feel like there was something else I wanted to mention, but what was it? Yes. So your spiritual abilities, right? So it's like, this is one of the biggest symptoms. Let's just go into the symptoms. Okay. One of the biggest symptoms is your spiritual abilities getting blocked. It's like, I know I'm psychic. I know I have spirit guides. I understand all these things, but I can't experience them. The number one reason that I've observed and seen and received from clients and people and whatever, remote viewing, is that you are purposefully blocking your spiritual gifts because of fear of, I don't want to be seen. Because if I am seen, if people know what I can do and who I am, my life is threatened. That's what it comes down to. It could be one lifetime of ritual abuse or many lifetimes of ritual abuse, but no matter what, all it takes is one time for your soul to be like, nope, no, thank you, not again, not in this lifetime. So I'm going to suppress exactly who I am for safety. That's what it is. It's a defense mechanism. It's a safety mechanism. I am so much more safe being a human. I'm just going to be an accountant. Yep. But I'm going to be so deeply unfulfilled and unsatisfied pretending to be this human. Because I've lost a part of my true self. I see it. I see it. I've lived it. I've experienced it. I think I was able to surpass it at a very young age, which I'm grateful for, right? But I get it. I get this deep, deep soul fear of I cannot be seen, I cannot be heard, and I cannot step into my true self. Because if I do, my life is going to be threatened. Like, that's it. Like, this is a life or death fear that you're feeling that is propelling you into survival mindset, that is propelling you into staying small, keeping yourself small.
So I believe this is kind of this is also her talking about, I think, maybe people afraid to speak out. I include myself in that category for a long time till I started making this channel. But maybe to some extent too, what keeps us stuck in and not expressing ourselves and maybe not achieving whatever level we need to achieve, and then eventually breaking free of this karmic manipulation and cyclic reincarnation in this planet. So anyways, all right, now we're at the end of Elizabeth April. Now we're coming to another remote viewer. And again, notice the stark contrast between Brett Stuart, what he and his team of remote viewers observed about the world and how he describes the prison planet, to how Elizabeth April describes it. Again, both via remote viewing accounts. How do we make sense of this all? I don't know. I don't know. It's very difficult. It's very frustrating. Let me know how you guys make sense of all this information when it doesn't exactly match up. I mean, I can't just go out there and be like, well, I'm going with Brett Stewart and I'm ignoring everything else, or I'm going with Elizabeth April. She must be the one that's correct. Like, I can't do that. I think it just doesn't. I don't feel like certain these other folks are so off the mark or trying to push information that they don't believe is true, for, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like that. Maybe one day I'll come to a different conclusion, but I feel like, I don't know. I just got to keep searching. The truth has got to be in there somewhere in between and in between everything. And there's got to be some explanation why it's not coming out all the same from people that are trying to just tell the truth. Anyways, all right, here is Brett Stewart. Listen to this. Check this out.
When we originally described this site, it's a fence or a grid around a place. This acts as a barrier. It collects and traps people, things, or objects. This is actually an innocent planet that is being used in an unintended way. And this meters the flow and acts as a checkpoint and an access point for an external force. One viewer described it as similar to hocus pocus in a way of its energetics that the viewer wasn't familiar with. And it's occurring on a crowded planet. It's a deliberate function that acts as a cage. People have been dispersed here, and a form of perverted injustice is occurring. Third viewer described it as a large naturally formed object, like a planet, that acts as an animal pen. This is a refugee camp tucked away out of sight, and a magnetic force. It stirs, agitates, and it works in a cylindrical manner, like clockwork over a long expanse of time. In my session, my work described a planetary system that's extremely crowded and jammed. Ghostly voices are flooding into this place, and it's incredibly harrowing for them. It's a bone-chilling experience. As a viewer, when I remote viewed this, I had descriptions that it made me upset in the session. It elicited contempt for what was going on at the site. But the activity at the site was this concept of a net that's been spun, and it's an operation of catch and release on a grand scale. So there's a massive grid that exists around this planet, and it acts as a checkpoint, a waypoint, or a rest stop where souls are drained, and then that in turn energizes something else. So very, very specific information about souls, about the clockwork nature over a long expanse of time, as well as this collecting, trapping, and then re-releasing. All this information came in. Okay, what's going on locally here? And the fact that it's the entire planet.
Okay, wild, right? So that is I think that's a pretty substantial difference. It's not just individuals feeding off of us. There's energy being extracted, and that's powering something else, he said, but he doesn't say what. So that's a very curious description. Plus the grid system, the catch and release, all of that I feel is unique. Now, this is from unique compared to what Elizabeth April said. And again, this is from a team of 4 independent remote viewers. They were all told to remote view this target, but the target ended up being Earth. Now, in the way that they conduct remote viewing, the way that they kind of make sure that it is objective is they give the guys like 8 numbers or 6 numbers that are totally random and they don't mean anything. But the person who generates the target, they think of the target, and then on like a quantum level, I believe the numbers then have the association of the person who creates the target. So the target was Earth, and then they're given that number. So they don't know what it means, but it's meant to be like a psychic or a mental connection. And then they all try and seek out that target. So apparently in this remote viewing exercise, the target was, of course, Earth, and this is what they're viewing. Now, he goes on to describe this grid system that he mentioned that's surrounding Earth, and now he talks about how it works.
The process works is that Earth is shielded by a companion object. And we're not sure if this is a physical thing. I mean, we're dealing with if this is a technology, it's a type of technology that's so far beyond what humans can even probably comprehend. It may as well be magic. I mean, it makes sense why one viewer probably uses this word, hocus pocus. It's so far beyond his own lexicon that it may as well be magic. So whether this is a physical object or not, we're really not entirely certain. It would make sense that it's not physical, but you can make a couple different, I suppose, educated guesses. Maybe it exists in a phased state, a different dimension, where this object is, this companion object that creates this net. We're really not quite sure, but it's most likely because we don't have the vocabulary or the comprehension to even understand how it exists in this state. But so we're going to use words that we can understand, the mechanical aspect of it, the energetic aspect of it, the acting like a net, things like that. First viewer said it's a companion object to Earth. It's something that's powerful and magnetic, and it squeezes tightly around the globe. Another viewer describes it as a magnetic vice that is attached around a large place. It's a mechanical process that incorporates destructive chemicals, and an individual undergoes bombardment as they pass through this system. And the people that pass through, they feel lost. They don't have an understanding of what's going on, kind of associated with the losing of memories would make sense. But they have this desire that seems to remain consistent through them, even though through this feeling of lost. More work describes that it's a little bit more specific. It actually gets the information point that these are souls that are being bent back towards the planet, and that the information, that the closest analogy was kind of like gravitational lensing, where if your soul is light, instead of kind of shooting off after you die off the planet, off to somewhere else in the universe, what's occurring is there's a artificial structure that is lensing or curving your light back down to Earth again. And then every time this occurs, it's constantly lensed or pulled back. It shows that this is an activity, is powering a massive rotating object that visually appears like an axle in space. It's fluctuating and absorbing energy that's created by this lensing effect. So the act of actually creating the lensing, of sending the light soul back to Earth, generates energy inside of this large structure. And it seems to be, there's chemicals that seem to be involved, at least that's our vocabulary to describe what's going on. Something's being bombarded. There's a destructive process, which I'll get into a little bit further in the work. But there's actually a fracturing that occurs to force this light, this soul, to kind of come back down to the planet again for a second, third, infinite amount of times. But ultimately, that's powering something else.
That's wild. So there's a couple things that are mentioned there. Number one, this idea of sending the souls back or lensing them back, and that in and of itself has an energy output. Another, which is it not mentioned by Elizabeth? Then we have another thing which he mentions too, which is he talks about this magnetic system or something that is causing people to forget things. This is the memory wipe I think he's alluding to, or he said that's consistent with a memory wipe. Something David Icke also talks about. Why is it that when we incarnate in each life or reincarnate, we have no memory previous lives? I mean, is that how it's supposed to be? I'd be very curious to know what Elizabeth April's thoughts are on this phenomenon. Is that intentional? What's the purpose of it from her vantage point? Because it is interesting that if you when you're taking the narrative that we are trying to learn and grow and evolve spiritually when we enter each life, what is the point? And maybe there is a point, I don't know, but what is the point of wiping our memories each time? Because how do you generate cumulative knowledge? Or is it not about cumulative knowledge? Maybe it's about something else, but that's a fascinating point that David Icke and others have mentioned, that, well, what the heck is the point of memory wipe? Yeah, A, it could be part of a learning process deeper than what we can understand, or B, it's because we're being manipulated. And if we have our memories wiped each and every time that we reincarnate, then it's easier for us to be manipulated. It's diminishing our knowledge base of perhaps everything that we're learning about what's going on. So that's a little contrast that we need to be clarified. And then here he talks about what is happening to our souls, a different narrative once again.
Well, what is being done to the reincarnating souls? There's a fracturing that is occurring. So the mind, the remote viewing data specifically stated that the mind and body of a person is splayed and fractured. It's rendering them very confused and upset about their predicament. Something is being extracted and taken from them without them being conscientious of the occurrence. The analogy that was used in the work is that of bees in a box, or like a harvest of honey from bees. And that there's a honeycombing. This is kind of the trapping within the mesh that's occurring, that's going on. And then there's a third party that comes in, extracts honey out of this box, this bee box, takes it for some other purpose, and then puts the bees back into the box. And that's a very close analogy that matches what is going on here with souls. Another viewer described it as harvesting. There's a harvest that occurs when a soul goes up and then is refracted back down. More of the remote viewing work describes that there is the whole circumstance itself is referred to as toxic. The number of souls, the amount of individuals that are reincarnating on this wheel, is that creates an instability that is required for this alchemical process. Is that without this volatile planet, without volatile souls, without creating this certain type of scenario where someone's taken and thrown back and you have no memory, it wouldn't produce what is desired by this third party. The crowded state of Earth and the number of souls here is required to create an optimal environment to extract what's desired. The confusion and anger caused by the confinement feeds into this process. And an aspect of the individual's mind or their soul, the intelligence itself, again, it's using our language, may not be literal, it may be more metaphorical, but is that the intelligence or the mind of the soul is being fed on by an external parasitic force.
Parasitic force. Other people have talked about this. Again, would be very curious to know Elizabeth April's take on this. By the way, the other interesting thing about this is, again, this is 4 different remote viewers that all saw the same thing, which still doesn't necessarily mean everything, okay? But it does add a vote of confidence to what these guys were seeing, since they were all converging on this same target, and they seem to see something similar. But again, he mentions in that clip, again, the energy is taken and then used for another purpose. What purpose? What are they powering with this? And why are they using this type of energy compared to 0 point energy, or I don't know, just any other type of energy? It's also interesting that energy is such a focal point on our planet and in this world as well. And it seems that this other type of energy, Loosh, or whatever you want to call it, is a big focal point seemingly as well. Finally, he talks about how we escape the system, and going back to this soul trap idea. So he talks about how we escape, contrasting with what Elizabeth April says. Check this out.
Was how does one achieve moksha? And while this specific aspect was not something we went too deep into, even though, moksha is the liberation from this. A lot of because of the way that a topical remote viewing search is set up is it tries to get as much information or surrounding the idea. And so we could have just completely focused directly on, okay, well, how does one achieve moksha? But we got a lot more information than just that. But the information we did get, it shows a couple different things. First of all, it shows that upon death, that the particles, again, we're using our vocabulary that the viewers have, whether it's actually this, it may be something else. It's the closest in the vocabulary that we can use to describe it, is that particles like cosmic dust or dark matter, something strange, a strange type of particle that we don't have a description for, becomes charged and creates an emission. It's launched out of the individual very, very quickly, like a cannonball out of a cannon, or a bullet out of a gun. And that this occurs from the center of the individual's being, the central nervous. So it comes out of the central nervous system. In other remote viewing data, you actually can see this, is that if you do an event recreation or remote viewing and you do the exact moment of death, and across the board in almost all of those remote viewing sessions, you see a spiral, something is spiraling right out of the top of the head of the individual from their internal system. And when you look at that, massive amount of energy is being expulsed. And what's being described in this session is that is essentially what the soul is. That is the release of the intelligence of the mind from the body, from the physical. And it's being sent to a place that is described as a tangled mess or a super highway for the soul. But as the previous contextual information was showing, is that there is a mechanical object around Earth that prevents a soul from reaching this highway. Seems like if you're able to reach the superhighway, you can go pretty much anywhere you want. Achieving moksha gives you access to this superhighway, and where those lead, your guess is as good as anyone else's, I suppose, at this point. But for this to work properly, to actually achieve moksha, is that the position and the angle with which you exit your body is very, very important. And the concept in the work is that it brought up the idea of how the Egyptians used to evoke an out-of-body experience, and how the angle with which the body was actually even laying was considered important to the Egyptians. And in the remote viewing work, it described that this 45-degree angle was a key element. And so it's as the body dies, the soul needs to exit at a correct angle, lest it be trapped within the system again, and then is refracted back and then lensed back again into another body. Second piece of information that was obtained on how one achieves moksha is that it shows it as a blissful moment, but that an unseen actor unfolds something like a safety rope here. And there's a mechanism, the mechanism or the device that has held this group of people hostage in a cell is, again, it's describing this broken record where they've skipped again and again and again, is that there's something like a safety rope that if you exit at a right angle, is that there's a group waiting for you to help you the rest of the way out. I would assume, at least we would assume, that it's probably the group that used to be in charge of this particular space or in charge of this environment around Earth as far as death is concerned, but then had to give it up for what they deemed a greater good during the treaty or the armistice. And so, but they're there that if you can meet them at a certain point, they can help you out the rest of the way. The energetics leaving the body, though, is that there's a great deal of fear that's associated with this. Again, because of the reincarnation process, because you don't have any of the memory that's associated with what's going on. It's all seemingly brand new to you. And so the fear of this seems to be something that prevents most people from ever getting that. And instead, they get trapped up into the system or the device that there'll be more work. I'm laterally thinking here, but I don't want to get too off topic. Another YouTube video, which I'm going to discuss, is the most significant remote viewing target. And it's going to talk a little bit about this because it's very, very important. And it has to do with not going into the light when you die. But I'm not going to go too far down that road. But it seems that because of the fear from when you die, that and needing to exit at a certain angle to find that kind of safety rope where someone's there waiting for you to help you get the rest of the way out prevents most people from actually reaching it. The end of this procedure is something, the way we describe it is, it's like you've had a vice on your head for a very, very long period of time. And this vice has gone all the way down into your brain, into your mind. There's cords and cables. You didn't even realize that was occurring. That's created this environment for you to repeat these lives over and over again. And that the freedom from Moksha is this device is being ripped off and taken off the top of your head. And so, the closest analogy to something like that is you could look at the movie The Matrix when Neo wakes up and all the cords are pulled out of his back. That's what we describe when you obtain moksha. That's, in this essence, in the human vocabulary, what is occurring. And the drawing is something in your head is being ripped off and is being pulled off violently. That's kept you here.
Wild stuff. Talking about that angle, which is something I'm curious to know more about. He also mentions the idea of not going into the light. That I think is something that is mentioned in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I'm reading now, by the way, and I'm going to do some videos about that later. But I'm just about 1/8 of the way through the book, so I'll be doing videos probably throughout the next couple weeks on different chunks or sections that I've read, and just to share little excerpts, trying to understand that better. But yeah, ultimately, the way he's describing it is a big grid that we're sort of beholden to, and we're trapped in, and we're stuck in this whatever it is, some technological field, and we're harvested and then sent back, and our memories are erased and wiped. And it does seem quite different than what Elizabeth April is talking about as purely a trauma-induced attachment to Earth. How do we make sense of it? I don't know right now, but we're going to go deeper. There's more perspectives to explore. There's more people that are worthwhile listening to. Sorry, we have one last clip from Brett Stuart before we move on to David Icke. And this is what he says. Why was the system created in the first place?
So the next bit of contextual information that we were able to obtain with the project is it was to answer, why was the system created in the first place? And this remote viewing data points to the system on Earth, and that it's just one tiny component in a much larger system. It's minuscule. It's a much, much larger operation. And it describes that we are part of a funnel, and it's a slough or a state of moral degradation or spiritual dejection in a manner. And that the system encircles us, and that its proponents have cast a wide net, not just here on this planet. And the advocates, or the torchbearers of this system, whether or not it's exactly these things, again, it's the viewer's vocabulary. I really have to stress this. So it's like this, but those who advocate and perpetuate this system, the closest vocabulary in the viewer's own words is that these things are like demons. And so they're not real wonderful things. Again, the previous work of what's feeding on the intelligence during this extraction process that then fractures the individual, the soul, and then sends them back. It's something parasitic, something that's twisted and warped. But the work describes that they have put man in this cage, the mind in this cage, and that wars of men, anarchy, destruction, societal overthrows, cyclical revolutions that occur down here all fuel the system that actually keeps us entrapped. And so the unstable, this goes back to and reinforces the idea of the alchemical process of this all, of the stew that's created down here, the uncertainty, the mayhem, because there's just far too many people here on this planet, is that's intended because it creates the chaos that feeds into the system that powers it. And so when pinpointing in the remote viewing work, the energetic activity that's occurring when a soul dies, it gets caught up in the system and then it's sent back, it appears that a part of them is chipped off and then carried off somewhere else. And so it's extracted. Again, this is the honey that's then taken from the bees. And when you view this space, you get a couple, first you get the sound and you get voices, and it's just, there's many voices that are kind of caught in this system, and it's a drowning out sound. And it's all incoherent talk. That's when you're describing this. It's a limbo state that's occurring. And these aspects that are chipped off are described as ghosts, so chipped off of the soul. They're described as ghosts, and they're shells of what they used to be. These are aspects of the soul that have been drained up and used, and an overwhelming melancholy and sadness is associated with these remnants. This is what's split apart and fractured off when the soul becomes enslaved. They're bundled up like a collection of twigs, and they're used as kindling. The viewer described it as just a massive amount of injustice. The purpose, why the system was created, is that it acts as what's being chipped off every time someone reincarnates. What's being taken is being used as kindling. It's a type of fuel that feeds a different system that doesn't have anything to do with here. So we're in a way part of an engine, one tiny piece, or one engine that feeds back into a power plant. So the purpose of the system is kind of analogous to, we're on a railway system, and that railway system, which is a railway of conquest, outer expansion, requires energy. It requires oil or grease to pad the railway, to continue the constant outer expansion, and that without this energy would be unable to do so. And so, it needs oil to burn to travel across these large, massive expanses. But it's more than that too, because it's not just the traveling that requires the energy input, or even the conquest, but it's also what is creating a space or an environment for those that are in charge of this operation to pop in and out anywhere they want along this line, along this chain. And so ultimately, though, all these roads, if you will, lead back to Rome. There's like a central one that exists in that this energy is then powering this massive system.
Okay, so there it is. We get the answers in that clip, I think, is that all this energy is being fed into. It's also, he also mentioned there at one point too, that the energy that is generated is also being fed back into this system to power it, but maybe the majority of it, or the bulk of it, is sent back to allow for the expansion of these entities, and then also to power their main base or their home base or their main world. And again, why it has to be this type of energy, I still don't know. Is this type of energy, Loosh, so much more powerful than any other types of energy that we're familiar with? I don't know, but that's it. So we are a Loosh farm, a power plant that is feeding into a larger system that is keeping these entities able to have all this type of power where they can pop in and out and manifest in certain places. So this is starting to make a little bit more sense in terms of why this is happening here and maybe elsewhere. Okay. I know we've got one other clip here, but I'm going to actually move on. I'm going to skip this last clip here, the fact that it is a prison planet. We're going to move on to David Icke, because I think we got the bulk of the information from Brett Stuart from all those clips. By the way, I have a full video dedicated to that remote viewing experience, and it has a few more clips, goes into a little bit more detail if you want to check that out on the channel. But now let's talk about David Icke's perspective. And I think a lot of what Brett Stuart was saying does match up with what David Icke is saying. And by the way, that idea that he mentioned, that energy is also being pushed back into the system itself to power the system, that's going to be mentioned by the Gnostics. So you're going to see that shortly. But let's go back and let's take a listen to this clip of David Icke talking about reincarnation. We have two clips talking about the idea of reincarnation and ultimately this whole system and why it's here.
We're in such a challenging environment, such a challenging energetic environment. We need to be a bit kinder to ourselves and realize we are in a seriously challenging situation. So they talk about, and I talked to these people and read their accounts, and millions of near-death accounts now. And I came to the conclusion a long time ago that reincarnation is real. The reincarnation of consciousness, not the reincarnation of the body, it just dies and disappears. Reincarnation of consciousness in and out of this reality in so-called different lives. And these people that can remember their between life, if you like, between human life experience, they talk about how detailed it is deciding what you're going to do next or what you're going to experience next in the human world. Because I started to realize that this matrix, this simulation, is not just the human level. There's another level of it, which is known in esoteric circles as the astral level. And the Buddhists have this concept of the wheel of samsara, where you keep leaving the human level of what I would say is the simulation, and you go into this astral level, and you keep coming back. And it's like, round and round forever. And as I looked at these accounts of near-death experiences, of going up the tunnel to the light at the end, or following the light, or whatever, and the common themes were kind of the massive, like, if they were a Christian, they would maybe see Jesus. If they were a Muslim, they might see a Muslim figure, a Hindu figure, right? So, right. And if you're a Christian and suddenly someone who looks like Jesus, and by the way, there is nothing in the Bible that describes Jesus, and the figure we call Jesus, the image we call Jesus, was Renaissance artists who decided that's what he.
All right, we got another clip right after this. It's going to play right into, oops, hold on 1 second. Yep, there we go. Oh, here we go.
We're in such a challenging.
Oh, no, next one after this. Hold on. Give me a second here. Boop. All right, here it is.
But what I was looking at with these near-death experiences and these common themes is that they were seeing religious figures, or that related to their belief, that they were seeing maybe loved ones or whatever. And if you're a Christian, like I say, and you see the figure you recognize as Jesus, I say they're projections, but it's all in the book, you're going to follow him. Of course you're going to follow him. You've been programmed to follow him here. If you see a figure you relate to Islam, and you're a Muslim, you're going to follow him, aren't you, up the tunnel. And then the common theme is that they go into this life review, right? And often this life review is held and overseen by what they call elders. This is common theme, constant. And they're in the robes, and they have the long white beard, and they're wizened, wise old men. Well, hold on a minute. In the astral, there is no aging. It's a completely different level of reality. The aging is something that relates to this simulated level of the matrix we call human. So why wizened old men? Because what are we programmed to believe here in the human world before we leave? That wizened old men are a symbol of wisdom. So these wizened old men then tell these near-death experience people that they still have lessons to learn. It's their karma. Karma, a load of old bollocks. It's their karma. And therefore, you've got to go back, and this is what these people that can remember their between life experience talk about, that the next life is decided and worked out on the basis of what they still have to learn, right? And what I saw was that the human world and this astral world have enormous common themes. And one of them is giving your power away to authority.
So in a nutshell, what we can say is manipulation. And this is the narrative. This is the way that David Icke is describing it in so many words. We have a religious figure, somebody to make us feel comfortable during the near-death experience. You come in, and then you have this counsel. You're made to feel guilty via the life review, and then you agree to another life and another incarnation, and you just get fed into the system once again via manipulation, which does resonate with something Elizabeth April said, that the entities or the system has to abide by the law of free will and choice. And so it's not as though you can be forced, I think, into whatever is happening, but if you get manipulated and you agree, whether it's via deception or not, then the free will binds and you must come back and repeat the dance. But again, this is the way that David Icke is describing it. It does feel similar to the way that Brett Stewart explains it, that there's a trapping system. There's a mechanism that is keeping us entrapped and sending us backwards. Now, obviously, Brett Stewart doesn't talk about the near-death experiences as manipulations, but it does feel along those same lines of the way that David Icke's describing it. Now, the next clip is David Icke says, well, what's the point of it all? Now, here's where he gets into his discussion of Loosh.
The question is, as I say, why? What's it all about? What's the reason? Well, and this actually will also explain why satanic ritual and why human sacrifice ritual, why it's been going on from the ancient world and is still going on in secret now. There was a guy called Robert Monroe, and coming back to what you mentioned earlier, he was a very skilled astral traveler. For people who haven't come across this, astral traveling is the ability to project your consciousness, as your mate said, project your consciousness into this astral dimension, not as a near-death experience, but while you're very bodily still alive, but you project it into the astral dimension. And you can experience the astral and what have you. Now, he became very skilled. He wrote a series of books. He was a media executive, actually, he started out. He wrote many books and popularized this astral traveling phenomenon. And he became so skilled at it that the US military got involved. The psychological part of the US military. And they did a study. It was called Gateway. And what they did was, and the CIA declassified the report some years ago now. They got together other people who had this ability to astral travel, to project their consciousness into this other dimension that's very close to this one. And the study was, well, what did they experience? And are there any common themes of what they claim to experience? Well, first of all, these people, these astral projectors in the Gateway study, they came across so many reptilian entities in the astral dimension that the study gave them the name the alligators. Oh, I've seen some more alligators, right? And what Robert Monroe said, and this is confirmed by others too, is that he learned in his astral travels over many, many, many years that these entities are feeding off human energy. But it's a particular type of human energy, low vibrational human energy, which relates to fear, hatred, anxiety, depression, regret, remorse, all of it, all these low vibrational energies that bring us down, that are the result of events in the world and our lives that give us this emotional kind of turmoil. And they're feeding off it. And when you again do the research into in mainstream science, every time we feel emotion and every time we think, we're generating a frequency. And that frequency relates to the nature of the emotion and the nature of the thought. So joy, happiness, peace, appreciation, everyone getting on, is a high vibrational energy. No good to these entities. They want the low vibrational energy because they're in a low vibrational state or they wouldn't do what they're doing. So in simple terms, these creators of this illusory reality have no interest in a world of love, a world of joy, a world of happiness, a world of peace, none of it. They want to constantly, through their global cult network, to constantly create events, wars, suffering, anything that would generate low vibrational, emotional, and mental energy, because they're feeding off it. And they have created this matrix specifically to hijack human perception in this low vibrational state. The more wars there are, the better from their point of view. The more upheavals there are, the more suffering there are, the more distress there is, the more you're trying to survive another week. Oh my God. All this stuff is giving off the energy that they want. And Robert Monroe gave this energy a name. He called it Loosh. And there's a chapter in the roadmap called Loosh Farm, which explains all this.
Loosh. And once again, he uses that same vocabulary that Elizabeth April uses. They're feeding off of it. Whereas Brett Stewart talks about it as powering this system itself, as well as a larger system that is basically giving these entities abilities that are, it sounds like supernatural, preternatural, these crazy abilities to kind of be gods is what it sounds like. But anyways, there is David Icke's perspective of, but a little bit, a little more than I think even we talk about getting into the near-death experiences and getting into the things that people see. I mean, Brett Stewart talks about the idea of avoiding the light. Obviously, seeing the light and following the light is a big part of near-death experiences. But then you go into, Brett Stewart didn't go into the minutia of what the NDEs or these experiences are like. David Icke says it's just one big show. It's just one big manipulation to get us to keep reincarnating, to keep feeding the machine. All right, now we get to the crazy stuff. Now we get to the Gnostics, who were apparently talking about this millennia ago, which I was not aware of. Thank you, whoever that was in the comments that mentioned that to me again, by the way. Check this out.
Monroe was an audio engineer, a businessman, a completely ordinary man who,
again, talking about Robert Monroe, who David Icke was just talking about, in case you missed it.
in 1958 started spontaneously leaving his body during sleep. He spent 3 decades mapping the non-physical layers of reality with the same methodical precision he applied to his engineering work. He documented beings, structures, mechanisms, and at some point in that research he encountered something that stopped him cold, a system he described with a word he invented because no existing word was adequate. He called it Loosh. The Gnostics called it the harvest of the passions. And what both of them found when they looked at it closely enough is significantly more disturbing than any version of this story you have encountered before, because they also found what it is for, and who is using it, and why the single most important design feature of the entire system is that you must never, under any circumstances, be allowed to know it exists.
Boom, allowed to know it exists. But there it is. Isn't that crazy? The Loosh, they didn't call it Loosh, but they called it the harvest of the passions, which makes sense. The harvest of the emotional energy of these passionate energies that are released in with these extreme emotions. So now in this video, they go on to talk about, according to the Gnostics, why how the Loosh is generated and why, what purpose is it serving? What is it powering?
Or unsettling. According to the Apocryphon of John, the most systematically detailed of the Nag Hammadi texts, this physical world was not created by the highest divine intelligence. It was created by an inferior, derivative, and fundamentally limited being that the Gnostics called Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth's defining characteristic is not malice, it is ignorance. He does not know there is something above him. He genuinely believes he is the only God. The text puts a specific line in his mouth that the Gnostics read as a kind of confession. I am a jealous God, and there is no other God beside me. Jealousy requires a rival. A truly supreme being has no rivals to be jealous of. The Gnostics read that line in Genesis and recognized this is the voice of a being who knows, on some level, that something exists beyond him, and who is terrified of you finding out what that something is. Yaldabaoth built 7 layers of reality. The Gnostics called them the Hebdomad, and each layer is administered by an Archon, not demons. Administrators, cosmic bureaucrats, whose function is to process the energy moving through their layer, and the energy they are processing is generated by human beings. Specifically, by the emotional activity of human beings living inside a physical reality dense enough to produce the kind of high-intensity experience that generates the output the system needs. The hypostasis of the Archons is not subtle about this. It describes the Archons studying the human form, attempting to understand what makes it productive, trying to replicate the conditions that maximize yield. They are not torturing us. They are farming us. And a good farmer does not want suffering for its own sake. A good farmer wants conditions that produce the richest possible harvest. Suffering happens to be what those conditions generate as a byproduct. Monroe spent years mapping the non-physical layers of reality before he encountered what he eventually called the Loosh system. And the encounter, when it came, did not come from a hostile being trying to intimidate him. It came from a being that answered his questions with something he described as complete, impersonal honesty. The way a biologist might answer questions from a specimen that had somehow developed the ability to ask them. In Far Journeys, Monroe describes an extended out-of-body encounter in which he is essentially given a guided explanation of what the Earth system is for. The being he was with showed him what he described as a farm, not as metaphor, but as direct visual information, human beings in physical bodies, generating an output. That output being collected, processed, and moved up through layers of reality that Monroe could not fully perceive. He asked what the output was used for. The being told him it was an ingredient, not a primary substance. An ingredient in something that Monroe's consciousness was not developed enough to process or understand. He asked whether the beings doing the harvesting were aware of what they were doing to the humans. The being said, in the way a farmer is aware of what he does to his crops, not unaware, not malicious, agricultural. Monroe came back from that encounter changed in a specific way. He said he spent weeks afterward trying to find a reason to dismiss what he had been shown, and he could not. Because the experience had the quality he had learned over decades of out-of-body research to associate with direct perception rather than projection or imagination. He was not constructing a narrative. He was reading a structure that was already there. And here is where Monroe's discovery and the Gnostic texts converge in a way that should stop you completely. Monroe identified that the highest yield Loosh was not produced by simple physical suffering. It was produced by complex emotional states, specifically grief layered with love, fear layered with hope, longing for something that is just barely out of reach. The Archons, in the Gnostic texts, are described as having a particular interest in human attachment, not in pain, in attachment, the suffering that comes from loving something you can lose. The Gnostics and Monroe, without any possible communication across 15 centuries, identified the same specific frequency as the most valuable product of the human system.
Wow. So there it is. Kind of a mix of what the Gnostics had talked about and also what Monroe had found throughout his experiences and his projections. Now, this is another thing that is mentioned in the Gnostic text, something called a counterfeit spirit, which I had not heard of before. Apparently, this is something that is like embedded within us that is causing more emotional upheaval, and this leads to a more productive, greater yield, apparently, of Loosh and this type of energy.
This matters. The Loosh system, as the Gnostic texts describe it, operates through a specific mechanism that is running in you right now. They call it the counterfeit spirit, an installed layer of emotional architecture that was not part of the original human design. It generates the high-yield emotional output the harvest requires. Fear of death, longing for connection, the rage at injustice that never resolves, the love that is always shadowed by the knowledge of loss. These are not weaknesses of the human character. They are features of the counterfeit spirit, installed, functional, doing exactly what they were designed to do. The pneuma, the divine spark that Yaldabaoth could not prevent from entering the human form, sits beneath the counterfeit spirit like a signal beneath static. The Apocryphon of John calls it the luminous epinoia, a divine intelligence living inside you whose entire function is to remind you of what you actually are.
Crazy. So I guess it's almost like some sort of system just enhancing the Loosh yield. Super wild. That was all a lot. That was a lot. So we hear some obviously overlaps, which I'm always looking for the overlaps. I'm always looking for those sweet spots. in terms of what the different folks are saying, and then we have some differences that we have to contend with, or maybe we'd find that if everybody dug a little bit deeper, all these stories and narratives would converge and be all the same. Now, I don't know. I don't know how to make sense of a myriad of people that all seem 100% committed to the idea of really spreading truth and being on the good guys team, and having these slightly different experiences or perspectives or whatnot. Obviously, we see that in the world and in life. You have different vantage points, but it's like this is different when you're trying to see objective reality and trying to really spread truth. It's not a thing where it just doesn't feel right to me for some reason. That not that it doesn't feel right. It's just hard. It's hard. Yeah, maybe it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. That truth is truth, and we should just be able to get to the bottom of it, and we should be able to have some convergence. I just think something must be going on as to why it's murky. Is there intentional deception going on? Are we ever going to be able to have just complete unanimous agreement on the whole system and how it works and why it was here and what's going on and what do we need to do to escape? Yeah, I think we will one day. But anyways, there it is. There's a whole breakdown from a few different people, noteworthy people, talking about the system, talking about, is this a trap? How does the trap work? What is Loosh? Why is it there? What is it being used for? That's it. That's everything. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on everything that I've showed you and everything that I've talked about, all the questions that I've had. If you guys have answers, if you guys can keep pointing me in the right direction on this quest for knowledge and information, please post in the comments, videos, books, all that stuff. I'm on a mission. I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm watching stuff every day to try and understand all of this and hopefully help illuminate it for you as well. That's all I got for you guys today. I am exhausted, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.